Welcome, everyone, to Stepping Into Your Leadership. I'm your host, Christine Courtney. Our goal here is to give you some actionable takeaways that will help you lead your teams. Thanks for joining us on this leadership journey. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to Stepping Into Your Leadership, where we explore the art and science of leadership and personal growth. I'm your host, Christine Courtney, and I'm very excited to have Blonka Winkfield in the studio today. Hey, Blonka.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great because we're going to kick off a brand new mini series here. A mini series. Do you remember that term?
Like
Do they
Dallas?
even use the term mini series anymore?
Shogun? Roots?
Shogun. We're doing roots. It's a mini series on communication because what we're finding is that everybody, when we come right down to it, like almost always the issues come around communication. And so we just want to focus on how can we get better at this, because it's really so key to all of your relationships, whether work or your personal life. So we can all work on it. So I wanted to focus on communication for the next few episodes. And so there's a lot of data that supports this too when we're talking about leadership. Studies are actually showing that 91% of employees believe that their leaders lack communication skills. I mean, that is a huge number. That's basically saying we're all complete failures. That came from the Project Management Institute. And they also said that poor communication is the root of project failure 1/3 of the time, right?
I'm surprised it's that low.
I know. But, sometimes it's going to be like, things don't work or machine, whatever, but this is key. And I will tell you that a lot of people who are successful in business or successful as leaders will often say that it's because at some point in their life, they had to get real good at communicating, right? A lot better. And we can all get better at it. So whether you're at the beginning of your career or you're very seasoned, there are things that we can all do, and it'll help all of our relationships, like I said. So I brought Blonka in because I want to focus on kind of what I think of as the foundation or the things that get in our way, which is oftentimes kind of our confidence around our communication and who we are, how we present ourselves, kind of, looking at how we are as professionals and our presence and kind of sometimes the self-doubt that can come along with that. So Blonka, let's dig into this and maybe let's just start at what do you think professional confidence means to you, and why do you think it's crucial for today's workplace?
One, it's extremely crucial. That's one of the biggest things. It's like a salesperson's thing. If you're confident in what you're selling or what you're saying or what you're doing, people fall in line very easily. So projecting that kind of confidence right off the bat, it's one of those first impression things, goes so far down the road. It is one of the biggest things in an interview, which is very key, especially for younger people. Projecting that kind of confidence at the right level is crucial. And then when you're moving up in the organization, letting people know that, I know this job and I'm really confident in what I'm doing and I'm ready for the next step is huge. And so that kind of projecting that kind of personal and professional confidence is, I think, one of the biggest things that employers and particularly bosses, in air quotes, look for when looking to promote somebody and move somebody to the next level.
Now, I think when people look at you, for instance, I'll just say you always seem confident. I know that must not be true, but that's why I invited you to this episode, because everybody always says to me, oh my gosh, I wish that I had Blonka's confidence, or I wish that I could walk into a room like she does and not know anyone and then immediately figure out how to be. So do you have tricks to that still, or do you think it just comes naturally at this point?
I'll say this. One of the biggest things with professional confidence is what you said, is effective communication. And I think I do that very well. And people don't understand, unfortunately, good, bad, or indifferent, the way you speak and how you speak. And then if you can effectively communicate an idea or a thought, that is probably one of the biggest things, honestly. It's people are always, I think, impressed by me because I speak very clearly. When I was growing up as a kid and in the South, people were like, you don't sound like you're from the South. And I was like, I know, that was one of my mom's big things. She wanted me to be very clear, concise when I speak, and tried her best not to, for me to not to have a Southern drawl or Southern accent. And I said, that's a horrible thing to say, that if you have a Southern drawl, if you have this kind of accent or dialect, you're not, communicating effectively. Not a true statement at all. However, in general, when people understand what you're saying and things are clear, it appears, to be more of an effective form of communication. So I think that's one of the biggest things for me. And another thing in professional confidence is, and I think this is one of the things like where people that work with me know, is being able to handle situations under pressure. That's a huge one. Not, like something bad happens at work, you're going to fall apart. I think that is one of the difficulties working with younger people now. They don't necessarily, this is a generalization, of course, they don't necessarily have the resilience, the grit, the fortitude, or they haven't learned those skills in how to combat and how to handle pressure effectively. So, a lot of times pressure happens and they bolt. They're like, yeah, this is too much for me. It's cranking up my anxiety. I already have anxiety. This is just making it worse. I can't handle this situation, or they shrink into themselves and they're just kind of like, whoa, I'm going to move back away from this. And they, which is another form of like bolting from a situation. So I think that's really big. And I think that's another reason why, especially when I'm on teams with other people, they see that about me, that I can handle pressure. And then that makes them feel confident in me, which bolsters my professional confidence with that batch of people.
So how do maybe in this case, younger people, like you're saying, build that skill, build that muscle of without having to go through a whole different life? I mean,
Right.
how do you fake it till you make it? Or how do you, like, what are some things that you even tell your daughters? Or I know I struggle with this with my I have a daughter who's 18 and it's the same kind of thing. It's like, I remember myself at that age. There were many times where I would just either fall into the background or just be like, okay, I'm just going to observe, or I'm not as confident in this situation as I certainly am now. So what do you, if you take yourself back, like what is some things that you would say to those folks?
I think even back is not even that far for me. I think one of the biggest things is like self-reflection, like really figuring out, like, one, start with everything. Acknowledge how you're feeling. Like if you're feeling that imposter syndrome, go like, oh God, I feel like I don't belong in this room. So like even starting with that, I think which is the easiest one to look at. Just like, and sometimes it's difficult, but usually when you feel it, you kind of know what it is. And just like, acknowledging that and then think about the why behind it. Like, why don't I feel this way? Like, why don't I feel like I belong here? Why do I feel like this is, out of bounds for me? And just kind of try and think about that a little bit. And sometimes you can talk that through with friends in general. But, I think that's a big one, is acknowledging it. And then one of the other big things is like the negative talk that you give yourself, like instead of like giving yourself pep talks, you're giving yourself these negative, I'm not good enough to be in this room. I shouldn't be here. I don't know enough. Yeah, I'm not smart enough. That is another one that is insanely huge, especially with young people. The comparison to other people. Like they're compared because they're on the TikToks and the Instagrams, and they see what everybody else is doing, how everybody else is getting promoted, how everybody else, does this, that, or the other. And that self-comparison is one that you have to, kind of tamp down. My youngest daughter, who she went to 1 year in college, and then her sophomore year was COVID year. So they sent them all home from California. She came back. And when she came back, she decided not to go back to school. She is a model. So she decided to lean into that. And that definitely took off for her in her career. And
very successful.
Yeah. So then after, when all of her friends were graduating from college who had stayed in, she comes to me and she's like, oh my God, I feel like such a failure. I didn't finish school. My life is crap, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, you got to be kidding me, right? Like, I don't even understand what you're saying right now. And she was like, well, so-and-so's doing this and so-and-so's doing that. And this one's got a job at a law firm, on their way to internal law. And I was like, look at what you're doing. I was like, which one of your friends would not love to get paid what you get paid, to do what you do, to be able to move around, travel, have, people, requesting them to come to Morocco, like it's, your life is so charmed. But literally, she was comparing that to all of her professional friends. And that became like a serious, point of contention in herself. And so we had to talk about that. Like, why are you feeling it? And then try and change that negative, like, I didn't graduate from college, so I'm a loser talk in her head. And then, turn that negative talk into a pep talk. Like, you know what? Didn't graduate from college, but still doing pretty good for myself. Still have this amount of money in my bank account. Still am able to take care of myself. People still respect what
Yeah.
I'm doing. Like, so she had to like figure out a way. I had to help her figure out a way to turn that conversation in her head around.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because if I was to pinpoint some of the things you're doing naturally, because this is what we can do for each other. This is right. This is what we can do for each other when we're feeling this way, is those points of like, okay, let's take a logical look at your life, take some of the emotion out of it. And like, what have you done that proves success, that proves this? And then you were helping her point those things out because those are never the things we think of.
No.
You know, I say all the time, you know, I quote Marcus Buckingham all the time that the brain is Velcro for negative and Teflon for positive. And that idea of imposter syndrome, I just wanted to give people a definition of that because it's so good you brought that up, because we all feel imposter syndrome, and they find that not even young people, all of us feel imposter syndrome. And the definition is a psychological phenomenon that causes people to doubt their skills and accomplishments. And people with imposter syndrome may feel like a fraud, fear that others will discover that their true abilities, you know, aren't that great. So all of us feel imposter syndrome at some point. And I think that's the moment where you have to coach yourself through that.
Yeah. You have to be your own personal mental coach.
Yes. Your own personal mental coach. Like, let us see, because you know, people will often say to me, oh my God, Blonka's such a badass. She's such a leader. You know, she's such all these positive things. But I know inside your head, oftentimes you will have to be your own mental coach. What are some of those things that you say?
I mean, for me, the biggest thing, especially for me, being the age that I am and in the rooms that I go into, my first thought and my first talk to myself is, you belong in this room, period. That's like the biggest one. You belong in this room. And 9 times out of 10, you belong in this room, most importantly, because someone invited you to this room. You're in this room because someone invited you here. Someone needed you to come. Someone asked you to come, you know. So if they asked you to come, then you should be here. Another quick analogy, I had a jewelry company. It was like a side hustle ages ago. And I, you know, made all this jewelry, and I was doing street fairs in New York on the weekends and working full time, you know. And so I was like, okay. And I had a friend who at that time was the head of InStyle magazine. And we just saw each other at a party, and she was like, somebody said something about my jewelry. And she goes, you have a jewelry line? And I was like, yeah. She's like, oh my God, how do I not know this? You've got to, you know, send your jewelry to me and I'll put it in the magazine, you know. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah, you need me like I need you. I'm inviting you, you know, I'm inviting you to send me your stuff. I'll check it out and see if it works. And so I've kind of carried that, like thinking about things is not like, oh, why am I here? Or do they need, no, people need you just like you need them for whatever reason it is. And so when I walk in the room, I think about that. Like, I've been invited here. Somebody asked me to come here. So I'm worthy of this experience. I'm worthy of being in this room. And that feeling kind of bolsters me a little bit. And then one of the big things is in rooms like this, or when you're in a special room or, you know, conference, whatever, is to focus on your strengths. And that's one thing I think that young people have to learn to develop. Now I know what my strengths are. My strengths are effective communication. I have dry humor, but, you know, in general in my life, but I can be witty that everybody kind of accepts. You know what I mean? So in my strengths, I normally present professionally well. I like clothes. I, you know, dress myself for the occasion, those kinds of things. So I focus on those basic strengths that I know are big for me, which are, you know, professional attire, being able to effectively communicate really well, and some kind of humor and levity, you know, that goes along with it. And so I focus on those strengths, and then I kind of take that with me. Like, you got a good bag of tricks. Okay, you can go.
So true. And I love what you said, that they need you as much as you need them. Like when she said that, that's a really powerful thing to hear, because I think for me in my life, that's been an aha moment. You
For
know,
sure.
like I started going on like a speaker circuit recently. And sometimes I'm like, what do I have to offer? Everybody's said this stuff. I haven't made up anything. I just, you know, I'm a good curator of what other people say, you know, and I would go through this whole thing of like, they don't need me. And one of my mentors, he said to me, Christine, yes, they do. Like, you are really good at discerning a lot of information and putting it out in a way that makes it tangible and actionable. Like, they need you as much as you need them. And I'm like, Oh my God. So when you just said that, I was like, yes, even somebody who's, I've been doing this work for decades. So I'm not new to this game, but you're always new to something, you're always
Right.
new in some room. And, if you're growing.
Right.
And it could be also at parties. Like sometimes you just go to parties with your friends and you're like, oh God, let me just have a drink and sit here by the painting, and you have to have, who's that wingman or wingwoman that's helping you, or, you're doing it yourself. And I would say that it is oftentimes, helpful to have somebody else in there that kind of can help boost you up.
Always. I mean, anybody that you can go with who can, be a starting point, jumping off for conversations, someone who knows someone else in the room, because that's a very difficult thing. You go to a room and you don't know anybody at all. It's very helpful to have someone who can be there with you, who knows at least one or two other people in the room. And if they don't, they are the person that you can kind of not look like a loser with. You can stand and have look like you're having a professional or a good conversation with them until an opportunity comes to move into the direction that you want to go into in the room.
Yeah, that's a good tip. I don't know if you remember this, but decades ago at this point, Blonka and I've worked together for a long time, and a bunch of us, we had worked together, and we were young, and, but we thought that we knew a lot in certain rooms. So we had the opposite issue in that we kind of got a reputation among certain government employees that we worked with that we were, cocky or overconfident, or people thought that we were, a little stuck up or whatever, because we had our little group. And I remember we used to laugh about that in the cocky, mean girl way that we probably did at this point in our life, in our late 20s, early 30s. And I remember our boss at the time, I remember being there. I don't know if you were there for it, but I know we said it a lot after that. But he said he was reading The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And I think that's how you say it, but it's definitely The Art of War. And he said, Christine, main thing I learned is appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. And I was like, what? And then I started thinking about that. And I said, well, if he's reading this book, I better read this book. And then I read that book. And I have said that to myself so many times. Like when I've had to go in legal depositions or things where I feel very weak, I'm like, okay, time to act strong.
Yep.
And then when I go into rooms where I'm clearly the most powerful person in the room, like let's say it's my whole team, or let's say it's somewhere where I'm, have a certain amount of power, I have to go, okay, this is the time to act like weak, in the meaning of I need to be curious and I need to ask questions and I need to not just act like I know everything, right? And that has served me so well. Do you remember that? I don't know. If you remember
I remember that conversation. I remember that being one of his favorite phrases because he said it to me before. And I think what you were saying was like, it's not weak in a way of like you're shrieking or you're making yourself smaller, but sometimes, we talk about this a lot in leadership in general, you have to know when to lead. And sometimes you're leading, you can still be a leader in that way by sitting back and encouraging others and doing the question. You're still leading, but you're just leading in a different way. So it's, more of like when we talk about situational leadership. So you don't always have to be the stereotypical leader, like I'm running this meeting and I'm telling you what to do. Sometimes it is better to sit back. And so, as you were saying, when you're, strong, appear weak, but it's not weak. It's just a different form of leadership.
It's a different form, right?
Yeah, taking a little step back. And the other thing I think people don't do as much, and you touched on it earlier, is, especially with self-doubt, is celebrate your success. Like, what good things have you done? You know what I mean? Like, so when I was having the conversation with my daughter, we were talking about finances, and she's feeling so down on herself about this. One of her strengths is that she's actually a really good saver. I taught them that well. So and so I was like, successful. You've saved this amount of money. Ask all your little friends how much debt they have and how much money they have in their checking account. And then you'll feel like a real winner. Like, ask that question, try that exercise out and see how that goes for you.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, okay. And that was because she's very monetarily driven, that one. So that was the thing that kind of got her got her back on the tracks after she derailed into, spiraled
she's
into
not
self-doubt.
thinking of that, all those positives. I'll give you another tip I want you to think. People love when we share some quick tips. And so if you can think of some more, but I have one more that I learned from one of the women. In my job now, I get to coach a bunch of executive women, and it's so great. And I learned so much in that process. But one of the women said to me that she owns a small company, and she has a lot of folks that work for her, mostly women, but lots of men too. But she said the one thing that she tells her team is that in any meeting that they are in, they must speak at least once, and they must say their name and what company they're from. If they're in, because they're oftentimes in meetings with lots of other companies. And she said, I do that for two reasons. One is that I need to get my name of the company out there more. But two, I need my folks to practice that they need to use their voice, and they need to start thinking about, how do I do this at least once? And she said, it's absolutely terrifying, and we have to train people around it. But what happens is later on, it's so natural that the folks that have been there a long time, they don't have to do that. Sometimes she has to tell them, you only get to speak 3 times, because like you have to go, wait a minute, I can't just take over this whole meeting. But I thought that was a really good tip. I was like, okay, yeah, one time, at least once.
That's it.
Do you have another one?
And while I was saying that starts a habit as well. That's the good thing about that. It becomes habit forming, because once they do it that one time, and particularly if they get any kind of positive feedback from that one time they participated, they want that more.
Mm-hmm.
They want that more and more, again and again and again and again. And you talk about how like things like that give you that hit of dopamine, and it, fuels your fire. And so with that, it kind of builds in that way, especially if it's positive. If it's negative, then they just got to practice that muscle and work through it.
Yeah, because communication is also practice. You cannot practice communication in your head. You have to actually start speaking and listening and practicing it. So if you think you're going to be great right away, you're not. It's only with practice. So what's another tip you have?
One of the biggest things, and I think, is, be really compassionate with yourself. Like, don't put too much pressure on yourself. I think that's the one, and so you have, I feel like with the younger people, you have 2 camps. You have the ones who are like, I'm not going to work that hard. That's ridiculous. Nobody should work that hard. That's crazy. You're ridiculous. And then you have the other batch that is so focused on being really good, really, really good. I got to be, so it's that, it's what the big main point is for that batch, really to overcome this idea of perfectionism. Like, that's one of my biggest things. Huge. Like, I grew up a certain way, things should be this way. And you have to overcome that. Like, because if I didn't get an A on this test, I failed miserably, and I don't deserve any good things and all these things. Or if I didn't get that account, oh my God, well, did you get another account last week? Yeah, but I wanted this one. Okay, well, that's good. That's great. We do want you to get the next one, but you cannot spiral because this one didn't come through. That's, so it's a lot of that kind of thinking about, okay, I'm going to give myself a moment. This did not go my way. That can happen every now and again. So be compassionate with yourself, and then also like trying to say everything doesn't have to be perfect. Everything doesn't have to go exactly right every single time.
Yeah.
That's, and that's, as I said, I think, with younger people, you have those 2 big camps, because you have some of them that are just so paralyzed that they don't do anything because they're afraid of it being wrong. And so they shrink into themselves with that, kind of negative talk. Like, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be exactly right. So I'm not even going to do it.
Yeah.
I won't even try.
Yeah.
So I think that's another big one.
I think also thinking about in the beginning, like that whole idea of sometimes you're not totally confident, but you have to fake it a little bit. And in those situations where, while you're working on being authentic and so forth, you still have to get through a meeting. And I think you need to think about body language a little bit. What is your posture? Are you sitting back? And the easiest way that I tell people to do this is to look around the room and who are the powerful people in the room, and what is their posture like?
Yep.
If they're relaxed, then be relaxed. If they're super confident, then mirror that a little bit. Do you know what I mean? And that's like a quick little tip to help you.
Yeah. With body language, it's called in the, mirroring or mimicking, someone's expressions or gestures, those kinds of things. It may seem weird and very sociopathic,
but it works.
I have no emotions of my own, so I'm just going to do what they're doing. But it does help. It helps the other person feel comfortable, and it helps you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So mirroring people's facial expressions or gestures, and it also makes them feel like you're listening to what they're saying. You're, paying attention, and because you guys are now on the same frequency, like, oh, we're in the same place.
Yeah.
They're happy and laughing. I'm happy and laughing. That builds a bond between you two that you don't even notice.
It's true. And studies will show that when they hook up people to fMRI machines and do that kind of mirroring or mimicking, so to speak, people trust you faster. They believe like, oh, this person is my person. And it's really, because you're doing these very subtle things, but it's just a hint when you're, a little bit needing of something. With that same thing, I would say, if you want people to listen to you, you need to listen to them. And Blonka and I were in a room recently where people were talking about somebody, really lovely things, sharing with him about all that he's meant to them as a leader. And this guy wasn't even giving them the courtesy of looking at them while they were speaking about him. He was on his phone, and this is not a young person by any means, but he was just on his phone, like looking at the stock prices or something. And I was like, oh my God. So make sure if someone's talking in a meeting or something, listening to them, looking at them in the eye, taking notes will make it so that when you speak, people will more likely do the same.
Yeah. Active listening is a big thing in body language. We talk about that. It's a whole other thing that we, train people on, is how to actively listen. And that active listening almost goes along with, mirroring facial expressions and, nodding when people are, okay, leaning in, all of those things let people feel like they're actually being listened to, and not that you're waiting to just jump in and talk. Those kind of cues make people feel safer in that way.
Well, Blonka, thank you for joining us. We don't have enough time to keep going, but I'm going to have you back because this is just the beginning of this part of communication. But all of you out there, Blonka is an amazing coach, an amazing keynote speaker. She's also a great salesperson. She does so many things as a leader in her role here with us and to help the world, the world of people. But anyway, she's physically in Atlanta or Mexico most of the time, but she's always here with us in spirit. And Blonka, it's so nice to have you in the studio today. Thank you so much. And we're going to have you back again for this topic.
Yay, I like this topic. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Tune in next time, you guys, where we dig more into communication skills, how to get better at this in work and in life. Thanks. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'd like to give a special shout out to our podcast producer, Richard Francisco. Check out our notes for any details. And if you get anything out of this, please follow us. And if you enjoy it, please take a moment to rate us or write a comment. It will mean the world to us. We'd love to hear from you. And if you just can't get enough, follow me on TikTok and check out tlpnyc.com/podcast for more information.